Venezuela's inflation just exploded to a staggering 234,000%. And right around that time, the supermarkets went up in flames. Beat text pop. I'm Gregory Hale, a seasoned correspondent who spent 10 years covering Latin America's oil-rich economies for newsrooms around the world. I've chased those spiraling price tags from Caracas all the way to Buenos Aires, and I've watched the headlines gloss over the human fallout. Beat visual. In this video, you'll see how a country's oil wealth morphed into a financial nightmare, why a loaf of bread priced at 3 million bolivars turned into a death sentence, and what the streets look like when cash stops buying anything at all. Beat zoom. Disclaimer: all names, dates, and figures come from publicly available sources. No fiction is involved. Beat tonal. The International Monetary Fund's 2022 staff review notes that inflation peaked at 234,000% in 2018, a number that dwarfs any textbook example of hyperinflation. Source: IMF Staff Report. Beat text pop. Aerial footage drifts over Caracas in 2013. The camera sweeps past gleaming oil rigs on the horizon, skyscrapers that sparkle like mirrored steel, and neon billboards flashing Rolex watches and Lamborghini silhouettes. The city radiates the swagger of petrodollars, a landscape built on oil wealth. Beat visual. Fast forward to 2018. The same avenues are clogged with burning trash piles, the sky tinged orange by relentless fires. Long queues of people snake around abandoned supermarkets. A mother clutches a slip of paper that reads 3 million bolivars for a single loaf, her eyes hollow. The contrast is stark, a visual punch that tells a story numbers alone can't convey. Beat zoom. The World Bank records show that by 2019, annual consumer price inflation topped 10,000%, still a fraction of the 2018 peak, but enough to make salaries meaningless. Source: World Bank data. Beat text pop. Meanwhile, Bloomberg reported that the bolivar lost more than 99.99% of its value against the dollar in 2020. Essentially erasing any savings families had managed to hoard. Source: Bloomberg article. Beat tonal. The root of the collapse goes straight back to oil. Reuters documented that oil production fell below 500,000 barrels per day, roughly half of pre-crisis output, leaving the government with a hemorrhaging revenue stream. Source: Reuters report. Beat visual. Compounding the loss, the U.S. Treasury's OFAC sanctions list shows that key PDVSA officials and the state oil firm itself were cut off from international financing, essentially choking any external lifeline that might have steadied the economy. Source: U.S. Treasury OFAC. Beat text pop. What does a 234,000% inflation rate look like on the ground? Picture a market stall where a single can of beans costs 1.2 million bolivars, yet that same can is worth less than a handful of loose change in a foreign currency. The price tags turn into jokes, and the jokes become questions of survival. Beat zoom. Families resort to bartering cigarettes for rice, batteries for fresh water, while crime spikes. Police reports from the period show a surge in robberies aimed at cashless retailers because cash has become a relic. The criminal underworld adapts faster than the state can crank out new denominations. Beat tonal. Hospitals, once proud of modern equipment, now sit idle as suppliers refuse to accept bolivar payments. Doctors are forced to buy essential drugs on the black market, paying prices that would bankrupt a small business in any other economy. The health crisis deepens, invisible to anyone watching only the macro numbers. Beat visual. Education suffers too. Public schools lack basic supplies. Teachers receive salaries that dissolve before the month ends. Children learn the harsh lesson that a diploma can't buy food, and the brain drain accelerates as professionals flee the chaos. Beat text pop. Across the nation, the informal sector swells. Street vendors set up makeshift stalls, accepting only U.S. dollars or cryptocurrency, while the formal economy crumbles under the weight of its own currency. The informal market becomes the only lifeline for many, but it offers no security or benefits. Beat zoom. All of this unfolds against a backdrop of political rhetoric that blames external enemies while ignoring the internal mismanagement of oil revenues. The sanctions, while real, are a symptom rather than the cause. The core malfunction lies in a system that never diversified beyond oil. Beat tonal. The human cost is stark. UNICEF estimates that childhood malnutrition rates spiked by double digits during the peak years, a silent epidemic that will echo for generations. Families ration meals to a single spoonful per day, and the sound of empty stomachs becomes a daily chorus. Beat visual. Even the night sky over Caracas tells a story. Power outages, once rare, now stretch for days. Residents light candles in abandoned apartments, their flickering flames reflecting the fragility of a society that once shone with oil-rich promise. Beat text pop. The question that haunts every economist is simple. How does a country go from $70 billion in oil revenue to a daily reality where money is worthless? The answer is a cascade. Sanctions tighten, oil output collapses, currency devalues, inflation explodes, and social services crumble. Each link reinforces the next. Beat zoom. In the coming minutes, we'll dissect each link, examine the policy choices that accelerated the descent, and hear from those who lived through the collapse. Their voices cut through the statistics, reminding us that behind every percentage point lies a human story of loss, resilience, and occasionally hope. Beat tonal. Stay with us as we pull back the curtain on Venezuela's hyperinflation nightmare, and consider what lessons it offers for any resource-dependent economy teetering on the edge of a similar abyss. Beat visual. Chapter 1. The Black Gold Trap. The words slash across a gritty oilfield shot, the screen flickering like an old film reel as the scene sets up a story that starts with bright promises and crashes into wreckage. Back in 1999, a fresh-faced Hugo Chavez walked into a TV studio and dropped the mic with, "Venezuela's oil belongs to the people." Seemed straightforward. Grab the big oil company, flip the cash into clinics, schools, and roads. By 2007, Chavez had locked it down. PDVSA was nationalized, and the corner offices got stuffed with loyalists who'd barely seen a drill bit in real life. Source: Reuters, 2022. The spin machine called it a win for the people, but the rot was already creeping in. Then came the numbers, raw, ugly, impossible to ignore. A chart slams down, showing output sliding from 3.5 million barrels a day in '98 to 1.5 million by 2018. The IMF, not exactly a bunch of doomsayers, later pinned the drop on two things: losing the pros who knew how to run the rigs and never throwing enough cash back into the wells. Source: IMF Staff Report, 2022. The graph didn't just show lost oil, it showed lost muscle, lost skill, lost future. PDVSA, once the heartbeat of Venezuela, turned into a piggy bank for the guys in charge. Kickbacks became standard. Crude vanished into shell companies offshore, while contracts went to cronies instead of crews who could actually keep the pumps running. Reuters dug into it in 2022 and found the wells were barely coughing up 500,000 barrels a day, half what they managed before the chaos kicked in. Source: Reuters, 2022. The money wasn't just slipping away, it was the oxygen keeping hospitals stocked and kids in classrooms. No oil, no life support. Then Maduro took the baton and things went from bad to surreal. Price controls locked in. Exchange rate frozen, check. Hard currency blocked from flowing to PDVSA? Yep. What followed was a death spiral. Less cash meant no filters, no valves, no fix for broken gear. That meant more outages. That meant even less cash. By 2020, the Bolivar was worth less than a speck of dust, 99.99% of its value gone against the greenback. Source: Bloomberg, 2023. Inflation wasn't just climbing, it was skyrocketing to 234,000% in 2018. Source: IMF Staff Report, 2022, then blowing past 10,000% the next year. Source: World Bank Data, 2022. And then Uncle Sam stepped in with sanctions aimed at PDVSA and its top brass. Treasury's OFAC list basically told the state oil giant, no loans, no friends, no future. The idea was to squeeze the regime, but the side effect: PDVSA got yanked off the global money lifeline, killing any chance to patch up wells or buy parts. Output kept diving deeper and darker. The pain didn't stay in boardrooms, it hit the sidewalks hard. Doctors who used to command respect saw their paychecks shrink to a sack of corn. One Caracas physician told us straight up he got paid in feed instead of bolívars, a brutal snapshot of a healthcare system reduced to swapping grain for penicillin. Teachers, once the backbone of the country, burned their lesson plans because the government couldn't cut a paycheck to save its soul. Some started hustling contraband across the border just to keep food on the table. The black market boomed, but it couldn't fake stability the way oil once did. Every dollar that vanished from the rigs meant one fewer antibiotic in a hospital ward, one fewer textbook on a child's desk, one more empty stomach waiting in line. The inflation numbers, over 10,000% in 2019, weren't just lines on a spreadsheet. They were the difference between eating tonight or going hungry. Families lived or died by the next smuggled shipment, the next bag of rice, the next scrap of hope. Venezuela's oil fiasco isn't a one-act tragedy. It's a crime scene with layers, a state company gutted of talent, a leadership that picked loyalty over pipelines, and sanctions that slammed the financial gates shut. The outcome? A petro-state turned powder keg, where the very resource that should have lifted everyone up became the fuse that torched the whole place. The chapter closes on a rusted derrick tower bent, pipes dead quiet. It's a mirror held up to a nation whose black gold has turned to blackened ash. Next up, we're zooming in on the faces behind the numbers, tracking how a macro meltdown rewrites real lives, one shattered dream at a time. Stick around as we strip away the jargon and lay bare a crisis that swore to share the wealth but ended up shredding the fabric of a country. The hyperinflation engine. Come 2018, Venezuela wasn't merely sinking under debt. It was being swamped by figures so massive they didn't just bust the economy, they wiped it out. The IMF notes that inflation surged to a staggering 234,000% at its peak. Not 234%, not 2,340%, but a mind-blowing 234,000%. Even a simple cup of coffee fetched a price tag of about 1.5 million bolívars. A family's entire monthly paycheck could only afford a single egg. Hospitals recorded a 30% surge in infant mortality within just 1 year. Source: IMF Staff Report, 2022, World Bank Development Indicators. It wasn't a slow collapse, it was more like a roaring combustion. The bolivar wasn't merely slipping, it was practically evaporating. Come 2019, annual consumer price inflation topped in 10,000%. No typo there, 10,000%, plain and simple. People were shuffling piles of cash around in wheelbarrows. Kids were going to bed on empty stomachs. The economy wasn't just shrinking, it was dissolving into thin air. Source: World Bank Data, 2023. And Maduro didn't merely stand by watching it burn. He tossed gasoline on those flames. Back in February 2018, Nicolás Maduro rolled out the petro, a state-backed cryptocurrency he swore was secured by oil, gold, and diamonds. The world didn't bite. Outside Venezuela, nobody gave it the slightest trust. Still, Maduro pressed it onto the populace. Taxes had to be paid in petros, oil deals were quoted in petros, and even food distribution depended on it. It wasn't really a currency. It was more of a loyalty token. And the moment it left the printer, it was worthless. Source: U.S. Treasury OFAC Sanctions List, 2023. While the petro flopped, another lever was tightening: U.S. sanctions. Early in 2019, the U.S. froze every asset of Venezuela's state oil firm, PDVSA, cutting off its access to international financing. Source: U.S. Treasury OFAC, 2023. No more dollars to buy food imports, no more credit to purchase medicine. The sanctions didn't spark the crisis, they only deepened the chokehold Maduro already held on the economy. They were a noose tightened around a neck already gasping for air. Oil output, Venezuela's sole real revenue stream, collapsed. By mid-2022, production dipped below 500,000 barrels a day. That's roughly half of pre-crisis levels. Half. The petro turned out to be a scam. The sanctions acted like a stranglehold, yet the outcome was stark: a nation starving while sitting on the world's biggest oil reserves. Source: Reuters, 2023. Then the unthinkable arrived. People resorted to eating zoo animals just to survive. Kids succumbed to preventable diseases as hospitals ran out of supplies. Whole towns emptied as families trekked on foot across borders, lugging only hope and fatigue. The bolivar shed over 99.99% of its dollar value in 2020. Not 99%, not 99.9%, but 99.99%. The currency wasn't merely weak, it was essentially non-existent. Source: Bloomberg, 2023. This wasn't an accident, this was engineering. Maduro weaponized hyperinflation. He turned the economy into a trap. The petro was a mirage. The sanctions were a wall, but the people footed the bill with their wages, with their children, with their futures. And when the dust settled, Venezuela wasn't merely poor. It was hollow. The screen blurs into a stark white title that reads, Epilogue, the Next Domino. A lone bell chimes, its reverberation mirroring the collapse we just saw. Across the world, warning lights start flashing. In Argentina, inflation surged past 200% in 2023, eating away at wages faster than any policy could keep pace. Turkey's lira tumbled, its value halved in just a few months, while Nigeria's naira shed half its buying power in a single year. A text overlay pops up. Every nation with a single commodity is one crisis away from this. Source, World Bank data. Venezuela's nightmare started with oil, yet the numbers paint an even bleaker picture. Inflation peaked at 234,000% in 2018, a figure that dwarfs any historic crisis. Source, IMF Staff Report. The next year, consumer price inflation still topped 10,000%. Source, World Bank data. By 2020, the Bolivar had lost over 99.99% of its dollar value. Source, Bloomberg article. Production fell under 500,000 barrels a day, about half of pre-crisis output, as sanctions strangled capital and equipment flows. Source, Reuters report. The U.S. Treasury's OFAC list flags sanctions on PDVSA and top officials, slashing the final routes for international financing. Source, U.S. Treasury. The montage shifts, revealing endless grocery lines, barren shelves, and kids clutching crumpled banknotes. The camera pauses on a faded phoenix mural, its wings shattered. The pattern's clear. Once trust erodes, no amount of monetary tinkering can bring confidence back. Venezuela didn't run out of oil. It ran out of trust, the narrator intones, the words hanging over a silent cityscape. The final frame freezes on a lone candle flickering against a dark wall. Economists warn that leaning on a single commodity can turn into a ticking time bomb, especially when political instability narrows the road to reform. The echo of Venezuela's collapse rings through every market that watches oil, copper, or gas prices with trembling hands. A question pops up in stark white letters. What's your nation's petro? The invitation serves as a summons, a bell tolling for the next victim who must choose whether to heed the warning before the next domino falls.